Good morning.
Good morning.
As we gather, I would like to invite you to allow the vibration of our bowl to bring you into the peace and quiet of our sanctuary. Good morning.
Good morning.
Haven't been up here for a bit. Welcome. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalists of the Chester River. We come together here to explore our unique spiritual journeys and learn from each other. I hope that you will find words of wisdom and supportive friends this morning. Welcome to Nevin Dawson, and thank you for sharing your music with us this morning. And thank you to Michael Casey, who is with us most Sundays, for sharing your music with us as well. I also want to welcome Sue again and again and thank her. She's going to share words of wisdom, and I am going to invite her up now. Oh, I do. I have one announcement. Just one announcement today. We have a meeting after the service today, and we need at least 2 more people to help us clean up the luncheon after our annual meeting. Do we have one more announcement?
A related announcement.
Okay.
The meeting after the service will be Zoom, but it is a separate Zoom link. So if you want to attend by Zoom, go to the separate link, which was sent out last week. And if you don't have it, just get in touch with Darlene.
Could you repeat that all night for the people on Zoom?
Yep. Okay, so people who are on Zoom who want to be part of our annual meeting this afternoon, there is a separate link for the Zoom meeting, and it was sent, did you say yesterday?
I think it was a few days ago.
A few days ago. It was sent separately, so if you go to your email, you should be able to find it. Okay. All right. Now to begin our flower communion
You're
service.
going to go back and organize people? You're going to. So we're going to start today with bringing in the flowers. It's listed in your order of service as the flower procession. But before we invite folks to come forward, I want to just explain a little what flower communion or the flower ceremony is. It was started over 100 years ago. We did put this out in the newsletter, so I'm not going to do the super detailed parts, but there are parts in Europe that had Unitarians, and they were no longer doing some of the traditional bread communions, but they felt there was a need. Norman Capac felt there was a need. Chapak felt there was a need to bring communities together. So he requested one day, and by lore, it's over 100 years ago, and it was then brought to New Jersey at a different point, just to bring a flower from your garden. Bring a flower from the roadside, I now always say, or the grocery store, and bring those flowers together so that we can see the beauty that happens when little things come together in the special ways of bouquets. So Nevin is now going to play. We recognize this is done in the spring at different times in Unitarian and Unitarian Universalist fellowships throughout the world. So we invite now our flowers, and at the end of the service, we'll share them with you. So we invite Nevin to help us bring them in.
And now we'll have our chalice lighting. The words are in your order of service. We light this chalice as a symbol of the light within all creation. We light this chalice for truth. May the search for truth be within us always. We light this chalice for love. May the love for others be strong in our hearts. And our hymn, our first hymn this morning, is Spring Has Now Unwrapped the Flowers, and it's sung to the tune of the Christmas carol, Good King Wenceslas. Once you hear it, we will all recognize it, I promise. And the words are actually in your order of service. They're not in a book this morning.
Please rise.
And now our unison reading this morning is from one of John Denver's songs, Rhymes and Reasons, and it is also in your order of service on the insert. And we would like to say this all together this morning. We believe it is here we must begin to seek the wisdom of children and the graceful way of flowers in the wind. For the children and the flowers are my sisters and my brothers. Their laughter and their loveliness could clear a cloudy day. Like music of the mountains and the colors of the rainbow, they're a promise of the future and a blessing for today. And the song that I am singing is a prayer to non-believers. Come and stand behind us so we can find a better way.
Very cool to bring Christmas right into the flower communion. Go, Kim. So, as I've thought about this service on protests and marches, I'm aware of all that we're watching today. One of the themes that we're going to lift up throughout the service, we are going to talk about a whole range of different types of protests and some history. But as I was thinking about this, I was thinking last week was Mother's Day, and the original Mother's Day that was originated by Julia Ward Howe was actually to be a holiday about peace. For the folks that like grammar, grammaticians, I don't know what the right word is, but you can explain it. What is it? How many people actually know that word? It's really scary that you guys are all out there, but okay. I'm also never the queen bee on spelling bee, I never did. But what I think is important to recognize there is the apostrophe was originally thought to be after. So it was mothers there, and it was about not only mothers, but women and folks who understood what had happened during the Civil War, that people had understood all of the losses. Just wait, we're good. The people understood the losses. And so when Julia Ward Howe was thinking, we need a day of peace, that's how she had originally conceived Mother's Day. I was thinking about where we have other witnesses right here in Chestertown about standing for peace. So sometimes you see all sorts of demonstrations, and I'm going to invite Vita to come forward now as we enter a time of reflection to tell us a little bit about the women in Black and what motivates them each week.
8 years ago, Bob, my husband, and I had just returned from Buenos Aires, where I was awed and amazed at the number of elderly ladies who were walking around the Plaza de Pio in Buenos Aires. And I got back, and lo and behold, there was a group right here in Chestertown, already started by our friend Len Bricker. And every single Friday from then on, and that's been 8 years that I've been involved with it, we stand in Memorial Park in black, as ladies in black, holding up the hope for a world without war. We stand for peace. We'd welcome any of you, man, women, and child, to come and join us and just recognize what it might be like to be without violence, without war in this world.
In that spirit, I invite us to sit for a moment in silence, to think of the ways that people gather in hope for what seems impossible sometimes. But the only way it will be possible is if we can imagine that world without violence. I invite us into a time of quiet and reflection, imagination on peace. For the many in struggle in our country, in our community, and around the world. We extend our love, our care, and our commitment to be part of a move toward peace. Part of that takes communities, and communities get built as we share and get to know each other. Kim will now lead us in acknowledgements of the heart.
All right, so this is the time that we share our joys and concerns. I would like to invite you and hope that you will feel welcome to come up and share what's on your heart. I will light a candle for you as you come up. And to begin, I would like to light a candle for the people of Ukraine and also the people, the Palestinian people, and all those people who are suffering from the toils of war.
The Warner family is thinking about Rob's older brother, Murray, who lives down in Texas, and he's 81. He had lymphoma in his back, and now it seems like it's gone to his throat. So he's going to go back into the hospital tomorrow for some pretty intensive treatment. So we're just thinking about him, and I encourage you to send healing thoughts and just keep Rob in your thoughts. Thanks.
I want to thank everyone who helped the Lions Club raise enough money to take every kid in the Rock Hall Elementary School to the circus on Friday night. We have met our goal, and all the kids 3 and up in the Judy Center, because 3 and under is free. And we might have a few more tickets, so I'm not certain exactly where to go with them. But every donation we get sends a kid to the circus, and we thank you. The other joy I have to share is that I get to go celebrate my friend's 80th birthday today. Whee!
I have a joy and not a sorrow, but a concern. I'll go with the concern first. My sister-in-law, who I've talked about before, she's back down in Houston. We're not sure exactly what her prognosis is. Her breast cancer is definitely now in 6 organs. So we're just hoping that it is a good prognosis. And the positive thing is my brother-in-law, Ray, the priest, is headed this way. He's probably passing our church right about now, going to our house, so I'm looking forward to seeing him.
This is just a hello and hope you feel better for Gail Folger. She was planning to come this morning but wasn't able to make it, but she did send us a lot of peonies, so we appreciate her presence that way.
Thank you. I'd like to light a candle. I've been living here for about 16 years now, and I really haven't found any friends or associates or people that actually care about me since I've lived here until I came to church. So I want all you people to know that you make me feel so welcome. And I'm so happy for that, and I hope to continue it. And anything I can do to help the church, I'm there for. So thank you for everything, the joy you've brought me, the people that I never knew before, and you're all good people. So it means a lot to me. Thank you.
for all those that have been spoken and all, joys and concerns that are on our hearts quietly. Let us take a moment of silence. Amen. And now we'll have our offering this morning from your generous hearts.
It's so good to be back and share some time with you again. The first piece I played was simply called Blues Etude by Jeremy Cohen. The piece I'll play now is a saraband by Kenji Bunch, written in 2006. And it has some interesting techniques, and I've actually had to detune my viola. And the final piece I'll be playing with Michael, it's called Melody. And there's Lata Tux, I believe her name is, and she is a Ukrainian composer, I believe. I'm not sure she's still alive, but the piece was written in the 50s. 1951. But here is Seraphim.
Wherever works for you. There's something about the unsettling feel of that music that leads us into our topic today. Thank you, Nevin. On March 7th, in 1965, 600 demonstrators attempted to march from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery. They were protesting the recent death of another protester, Jimmy Lee Jackson, and they were working on voting. The event turned bloody when white state troopers beat unarmed Black men and women. It was filmed live and widely aired on national TV, interrupting primetime broadcasting. We often hear the stories of John Lewis, and some of the folks were there. We sometimes don't hear as much about the women, and the League of Women Voters captured some of their stories about Bloody Sunday. Deborah Barnes Wilson and her grandmother Julia Barnes were there. Due to Barnes' asthma, they turned back before the violence began, and once they did, they started providing refuge within a housing project for those looking to escape the assault by law enforcement. Barnes Wilson's memories of that day include the sound of screaming and the smell of tear gas. Years later, she shared, "My maternal grandmothers and I participated in the march. I will never forget the sights and sounds of that day." Amelia Boynton Robinson had hosted MLK and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in their house. And that's where they were planning some of the Selma marches. She was known for her sign that said, "A voteless people is a hopeless people." She was among the protesters attacked on the Edmund Pettus Bridge on March 7th. It was one of the images that we often see where she's succumbing to the gas. One more. Rachel West Nelson and Cheyenne Webb Christberg were 9 at the time. Remembering this, Webb Christberg says, "It was like I was looking at a sea of blue. Hundreds of state troopers with billy clubs, policemen with tear gas masks, the dogs and horses. My heart had begun to beat faster because I knew that something was about to happen. And then as the attack commenced, she was carried to safety by none other than the late civil rights leader, Hosea Wilson." These are women who risked a lot, everything. They were young, some of them were children, to deal with the end of voter suppression. Protests and marches come with risks. There's disruption. It may spawn change, but there are no guarantees. But as the result of their efforts, we did gain the voting rights of 1965. Something to think about as we think about what it takes to now keep protecting those rules. I think those are just powerful stories of what protests look like. We had Vita's story earlier. There are many times in our history when there's some sort of change in direction is needed, when policy and legislation aren't moving toward justice, and maybe there's conflict abound, or maybe it's times when the status quo is the problem. It is just dangerous. It's those times we know we need a change in direction, but how will that happen? Sometimes it's pretty clear. There's a clear moral right way we might want to head, but often there is complexity in trade-offs. It's not always some clear path that we want to move from here to here in the process. There's usually complex history, and the implications of the choices of which way to head make finding a direction profoundly difficult. But someplace in this human toolkit, this kit that we all have, is people can gather. It's happened from 2,000 years ago. It happens And people can gather and raise issues, offer solutions, and in particular, put pressure in some ways on those who have the power to make some changes. So it's, I think, in that spirit that we hear about protests and demonstrations and marches. And I want to make sure we always add to that collection peace vigils and other ways that we can come together. Sometimes it's with careful orchestration like the 1963 March on Washington, but often it's small community things where people are tired of potholes or they're tired of something else, and they say, if we all speak together, it can matter. But do these protests actually change outcomes? Do they actually help us move the needle? What's the purpose? And importantly today, what are the risks? Because we've watched the campus protests in the past month, and we've got to ask some of these questions. And I'll come back to those protests at the end of the sermon, but I do know our Constitution absolutely protects assemblies as part of free speech. It's permitted, it's needed in democracy with some guideposts, with some ways to do it safely, but it is an important way that we express ourselves, and often, like the flowers, together, our voices get clearer, we may figure out collaboration, but it's not all easy stuff. For the civil rights, we know of the marches and sit-ins. There was the opposition to the Vietnam War, and in recent times, the Women's March in January 2017, March for Our Lives in 2018 after the Parkland shootings, and then there were so many places we came together in 2020 after the death of George Floyd. But there's other ways things come together. Labor strikes, labor gatherings, demonstrations that come together for environmental and immigration matters. And there are the power of peace vigils, when we stand in circles with candles. And then there are things like blockades of highways. With all of this, there is risk and there is impact. I want to go back to the voting rights of 1965. The goal there was pretty much specific. There was a lot in play, including poverty, and a lot of the different ways that people had been disenfranchised. We had an unarmed person, Jimmy Lee Jackson, had died on February 26th. So I want to look through a little bit of the scenario. So when it comes to March 7th, here's one account of what happened. The protesters marched through Selma, but when they tried to cross the bridge, they encountered a blockade of state troopers that were armed. As the protesters approached, Major John Cloud warned them to disperse, saying it would be detrimental to your safety to continue this march. When they refused to turn back, the state troopers advanced, knocking protesters over, striking them. The protesters did not fight back. 50 were hospitalized, including John Lewis, who was severely beaten. So the next day, Dr. King put out a nationwide call to clergy to come to Selma to witness and support. Among those who answered the call was Reverend James Reeb. He was a Unitarian Universalist minister up in Boston. And we know from some of the accounts, as he immediately moved from his living room in Boston, he had watched the live accounts, got on a plane to Selma. King was considering whether to disobey the order that was against the Tuesday march. In the end, King said no. He was telling hundreds of clergy who had come and gathered, I would rather die on the highways of Alabama than make a butchery of my conscience. So then, King led a group of marchers to the far side of the bridge, stopped, asked them to kneel and to pray, and after prayers, they rose and retreated back across the bridge to Brown's Chapel, avoiding a violent confrontation. Several of the clergy returned home. James Reeb decided to stay. If you've seen the movie Selma, they don't identify him as a Unitarian Universalist minister, but we know what happened. He went out to dinner with some friends, and 3 of them were clubbed on the head. He was rushed to the hospital. They wouldn't treat him initially. They finally performed brain surgery, and he did die a few days later. Reverend Reeb's death created mourning throughout our country. There were vigils held in his honor. It was a place where, yeah, there was power in the gathering, but there was risk. In April 1965, 3 white men were indicted for Reeb's murder. They were acquitted in December, and the Voting Rights Act passed in August 1965. So even with permits, even when things are peaceful, there is risk. There is goals. It's good that when we sometimes have goals and broad commitments to gather, but we don't know how it will come out. As I've been reading a lot of the accounts of some of the Vietnam Wars, I've been asking people, and I'm not going to ask you to raise hands or not, did you attend? Were you resisting at the time? Were you too young, not around yet? Were you in the service? One of the questions being asked is, did the Vietnam protests shorten the war? Did it help end the draft? Nixon ultimately was elected. I think the gatherings, as I read them, I was a little young to be at them, they raised important ethical issues. It was an interruption of adding important voices. Younger adults who had a different set of experiences helped lead asking the tough questions. They raised disgust, they raised worry, they were possibly going to be drafted. But we also have to remember that part of the price paid was by young soldiers who were then treated as scapegoats. We managed to create possibly the wrong enemy. It's not simple to press for change. What does move the needle? So I've thought about, as I think many of you have, what are we thinking and feeling about the campus protests today? I know I've struggled, but a couple things are clear to me, for me. What I don't struggle with is the right of free assembly. I think we need to make space for voices to be heard. It's critical for our society. I think we need some guideposts, but they don't need to be so stringent that we're just dealing with discomfort. I was talking to my daughter-in-law who's down in Charlottesville. My son and daughter-in-law live about less than a mile from the campus there, and a couple weeks ago, there was a very small protest there. In minutes, she says in minutes, maybe it was a little bit longer, but not very long, it was broken up by pepper spray. I think words might have just helped. She's now doing some counseling with some of those kids that were in that scenario. And at UVA, the questions asked, what happened in 2017? Where was the stopping there? I offer that not as a simple place, but just to understand the complexity of all the decisions that happen as a part of assembly. I do ask, where are the limits? And some of the ones that I found are the most powerful is we need reasonable limits, and we need to be neutral on content to allow a range of opinions and voices. What is a peaceful protest? What are guideposts that encourage us to come together and share our views? Because the risk is here. I keep thinking how much simpler it would be if what we were all protesting for or standing together for was for peace on campuses and beyond. I keep thinking, what if there were call to actions not only for ceasefire, but for the return of the hostages and for long-term ways to coexist? I think part of my struggle with today's protests, and again, even as I looked at this a week ago and re-looked at it here, is that things can get overly simplified. We've got a really complex region in the Middle East. There have been many failed efforts. We know terrorism is complex and power dynamics are complex. We know there's a history of those who fled Europe for safety, that were displaced, that wanted a homeland. It's all true. The situation, the horrors of what Hamas has done, the horrors of October 7th, and then the horrors of the level of response. I think it's when we take a simple placard, whether it says pro-Palestinian or something else, and to think there's one answer. You're either with us or not. I think that's part of what's been tearing at my heart, is just knowing how difficult the scenarios are there. But I think sometimes we also make things worse by forcing with us or not. In our earlier story, I talked about a woman whose sign had said, "A voteless people is a hopeless people." There's not exactly a direct parallel here, but I think there is something that we need to think about. When are we helping as people of faith with hope? We do need to talk about basic needs. We do need to talk about hostages held. We need to honor those many lives, to think about the fear. We need to see that reality. So is it naive for us to have peace as our vision? To hold that we all have inherent worth and dignity and basic rights? Do big gatherings help get us closer to that vision? It's not an answer. It's not going to be a yes or no answer, but I think it's something that we need to ask. As we decide to gather, what is the message we want to stand for? What is the message that we want to have as we take our flowers today? In a moment, Nevin will play. We will invite folks forward to take home a flower, and Kim and I would really like this flower communion this year to be done in that spirit of peace. I don't have any answer, but what I do know as I've talked to folks is it's been hard to watch the struggles and to figure out where our head and heart is. Maybe the question isn't that difficult. We do want peace. Maybe it's naive, but it seems worthy of our time. So that's the end of the sermon, but we're going to just gently move ourselves into flower communion. I think we will have some time after each person gets a flower for a short discussion, and then we'll slowly wrap up this service and slide to our annual meeting. In gratitude for everyone who set that up. So each of us, this is the flower communion part now. Each of us brings something to this fellowship, just as each flower before us is different, beautiful in its own way. The gifts we bring, the bounty we receive, are all not the same. Yet it is when we accept one another, when we recognize that we are part of a complex world, each offering our gifts, each doing what we can to move toward more peace and more care. So as we play the music, Kim and I invite everyone to come forward. Maybe we'll scoot the Joys and Sorrows candles off a little bit and invite you to come, take a flower, and as Nevin plays the music, to reflect on what you think about assemblies and what it might take to create a more peaceful world. I think the best you can, come up through the center, walk back through the aisles, and if you are somebody who's going to stay in your seat, Kim is going to bring the flowers to you if staying in your seat is easier. Our flower communion will now begin. Thank you so much. I found a few with thorns. We found how they were woven together cleverly at the bottom. Nothing is always smooth, but something beautiful happens when we gather. Kim and I are going to do a short discussion now, and then we're going to sing Peace Like a River and close our service. But we have 3 or 4 minutes, and I do think it's a topic that has been on folks' hearts. And I'd ask you just to share what it's affecting you, not just your general opinions on protests and whatever, but what is coming to your head and your heart from our words, from Vida and others. Any memories?
Thank you. As someone who's been in a lot of protests and led a few, the All Souls Unitarian Church, where James Reeb was also an associate minister, established a program supporting other congregations in their work on expanding voting rights. And a number of congregations have joined. And that might be something that this congregation could look at.
And that really speaks to the ripple effect of what's happening over 50 years later from coordinated work. Anybody else have a thought? Harry, Bob, and then Harry, and yeah.
So just one side thought on the college protests, and there's sides always to both things, but I think we should allow ourselves at some point to be led by that. If you think back, it's these college protests, it was during Vietnam. It was, to my mind, college students as much as anything, where they were looking for divestiture of their colleges from the apartheid government in South Africa. These things, I think, have helped, and I think, we as elders should recognize that sometimes our youth have wisdom that we could listen to.
One of the things that occurs to me is always what's 2 layers down from the messages you're hearing, and what else are we hearing from students about their discomfort with some of the current dynamics. And the students range in views. There's not just one view. Harry, I think, had it.
Well, the protests going on, it's easy to protest what's wrong, but what we need is what's right, what's the solution. It's so easy to criticize and so hard to really be constructive in your suggestions.
Reflections.
I can't help but think about the bravery of the people in Selma that refused to strike back when they were being beaten. And then I think that what may have turned the tide, and that probably did help turn the tide, was the fact that it was televised, that the public saw the brutality against these people, and that it might have had a great deal to do with the eventual passing of the Voting Rights Act. And then I try to think about it I think about the Black Lives Matter protests, which were largely peaceful. And somehow the public opinion kind of turned against them because it was advertised as the little bit of violence that took place was the dominant factor in the media. And for some reason, the Black Lives Matter movement did not get the public support that the civil rights movement in the 60s did.
Yeah, and I think each one of these, I think at the time of George Floyd, there's different pieces and momentum. I think a lot of times there is a call for what we should do. And it's tough work. If you think of Gandhi and some of the work that was in India, each movie I see is more things. So I think we're set, Kim, on that. So we thought as our wrap up is, I've got Peace Like a River, and we're going to sing the first 3 verses and then sing the first verse. Again, it is hymn number 100 in your gray hymnal. Please rise. you'll play it 4 times, so we're gonna sing 1, 2, 3, and then 1 again. Okay? You good? Please rise. Kim will now offer our closing words. Just the tail end of that.
So in closing today, I was just thinking of this poem by Amanda Gorman, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with. And I'm not going to read the whole thing because it is long, but I just wanted to read the last 2 stanzas, I think you would call it, just to put this thought into our minds as we go forward into our week and in peace, right? This is the last portion of her poem. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country, our people diverse and dutiful. We'll emerge battered but beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. Amen.
I invite us all now to extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. And Nevin will play the postlude, and after that, you will get your lunch and then stay for the annual meeting. Have a lovely week. Have a great week. Thank you.